On Wednesday, March 5th, the 300 members of Marching Mizzou, along with their special guests, met at the University of Missouri St. Louis campus to board the 9 Greyhound buses that would take them to O'Hare Field in Chicago, where they would catch their own chartered British Airways 747. The destination from Chicago? Why, London, England, of course. Marching Mizzou was to become the first American marching show band to perform at soccer and rugby matches across the Atlantic in the British Isles. When the buses arrived, members of Marching Mizzou had already gone through several choruses of White Tigers for the local TV crew, and band secretary Leslie Pauley was up to her neck in people still checking in. Was this band anxious to get to Chicago? Well, director Alex Pickard himself even mentioned the fact that for a band that has spent half its time on buses, it was remarkable to see them completely loaded within 10 minutes after their arrival. Shortly after 1 p.m., the caravan of buses departed for Chicago. After a year of planning, hundreds of hours of raising money, trying to find a place to practice, vaccination, passport problems, and hours of hard practice, the dream came true. Marching Mizzou was on its way to England to entertain the English in a way they'd never been entertained before. It was an 8-hour trip across the plains of northern Illinois, and ironically, the only rest stop was at a place that didn't serve bus passengers. At O'Hare Field, it was nearly a 3-hour job checking luggage and getting tickets. Then the British Airways 747 taxied the runway and climbed into the Chicago night. A few hours later, Marching Mizzou was treated to a beautiful sunrise over the Atlantic. At Heathrow Airport, the band boarded their buses that took them to the hotels, the London and the London Pentop. Friday morning, Marching Mizzou had its first scheduled rehearsal at Chelsea Stadium, several blocks from the hotels. Who said it never rains on Marching Mizzou? Apparently, the word hadn't spread to the British Isles. It rained each of the 10 days the band was in England, but the rain never once dampened the spirits of the Marching Mizzou musicians. For many on the tour, it was up every morning at 6 a.m. to shop and go sightseeing while meeting many interesting and friendly people throughout London, including the courteous bus drivers, like Pete Jameson, one of the more popular drivers. At night around London, band members experienced top entertainment in the theaters and in the pubs, but none compared to Marching Mizzou's own Barry, Mr. Country Rowley, who entertained the troops on the buses waiting for the rain to let up. Yes, not even Mr. Rowley's singing phased it for the band. In fact, everyone got of it. It was practice time at Chelsea, rain forcing the band to play in the stands. The start of the practice was a special occasion as the band plays the Mizzou fight songs for the first time on British soil. Just like back in old Mizzou, Marching Mizzou was to use every available space for practice. The band played in the stands, while the special dance acts practiced on the small track near the field, and the Golden Girls and Pom-Pom Girls and the Flag Girls used the concourse under the stands. After Marching Mizzou entertained Arthur, the groundskeeper, Arthur and a friend of his entertained them. Of course, between numbers, the band could hear an occasional flags come from behind the stands where Tim Lotzenheiser was drilling the flag corps. It was a fun rehearsal all the way, from Shine On Hartman's Moon, featuring one of our notorious baritone players, that's an inside joke, to the famous Chelsea chorus line. Well, everyone has special concerns and duties in the band, especially Marching Mizzou's president, Norman Rubling, whose dimensions and ideas carried a lot of weight with the band. The performance the next day at Chelsea would also be in the stands because of the field conditions, but nevertheless, Marching Mizzou was a hit. As the London Daily Express put it, "Look out, Wembley. Take warning, Twickenham. The Marching Mizzou are here. Who, you may ask? They are the show band from the University of Missouri, Columbia, all 300 of them. They gave their first performance in England at Chelsea Stadium on Saturday and brought with them all the razzmatazz of the American campus. The drum majors, the Golden Girl dancers, the flag wavers, the twirlers, we had it all. You've never seen anything like it outside a Hollywood stage setting. The band played and danced and sang with a verve and enthusiasm that got through to everyone, even the policeman tapping his feet to the strains of the Missouri Waltz. They're marvelous," said Chelsea director Dickie Attenborough, the game's been over 20 minutes, and there still must be 5,000 fans in the grounds cheering them.
On the bank of the River Thames, of course, is the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. Big Ben actually refers to the bell inside the tower and not the name of the clock tower, as is often thought. The clock tower is known as St. George's Tower. Around London, of course, are statues of many famous people, including, surprisingly, a statue of Lincoln, which is perhaps the only statue of him outside America. By the Horse Guards Parade and the Wellington Barracks, named after the Duke of Wellington, who fought at Waterloo and various other battles, of course, is where the horses are stabled, which are involved in the trooping of the colour and various other processions of state. Buckingham Palace is the Queen's residence whilst she is in London. In front of the palace is the statue of Queen Victoria, the last queen that England had prior to Queen Elizabeth. Crossing the River Thames near the Houses of Parliament, one can see the buildings associated with the House of Commons, St. George's Chapel, and part of one end of Westminster Abbey. The Admiralty is, of course, the headquarters of the Navy, and it is Trafalgar Square is well known for its statue of Nelson on top of the column. The Church of St. Martin in the Field is the church of the Royal Air Force. Crossing the river by Tower Bridge, which is famous, of course, for the road lifting up, one sees the Tower of London. Outside the tower are stored many of the cannons collected from various British military campaigns. In the tower, in addition to the crown jewels and the state regalia, are many other artifacts of the state. The tower, of course, is known also for the beheadings and the torture and the imprisonment of many of the nobility over the centuries. The guide speaking to the crowd here is a beefeater. It is part of his responsibility to show visitors around the tower. In the courtyard of Windsor Castle, one of the many ceremonial guards marches past. Nearby is St. George's Chapel, famous as the home of the Knights of the Garter, which is the highest order of English chivalry, and the burial place of many famous Englishmen. The Queen's residence nearby can be easily seen, and on the staff is her standard indicating she is in residence. Windsor Castle is one of England's more famous and better preserved castles. Trafalgar Square and Piccadilly Circus represent the centre of the nightlife of London. Nearby is Soho and many of the theatres and cinemas for which London is famous. It is in this area that most of the celebrations were held following the victory after World War I and II. The value of real estate here is probably the highest in all England, and much of it is owned by Peterhouse College in Cambridge.
It was Tuesday, March 11th. After several days of castles, museums, and cathedrals, it was time to get back to work. To this point, the tour had gone incredibly smooth, with only minor problems, such as colds, measles, a bad knee, nose complaints, late breakfasts, and a few stacks, or the fine art of piling on top of some unfortunate soul, causing a few headaches. The practice was at England's Wembley Stadium, site of the 1946 Olympics. The huge stadium was barren, and because of the rain, the band wasn't allowed on the practice field. So it was another practice in the stands, with the different specialty acts practicing in the small dirt area at one end of the field. Everyone was doing his own thing at the rehearsal. The true excitement of watching Dr. Pickard lead his great musical multitude. The skillful coordination of the cymbalists playing their shiny cymbals. And the poise and gracefulness of Ken Johnson. After Dr. Pickard got the word that the band would march at Wembley, rain or no rain, The band moved outside to the stadium parking lot to drill through the show. The next evening, Marching Mizzou would be performing before 100,000 soccer fans at Wembley. As one groundskeeper told Dr. Pickard while standing on the Wembley field, "It's every English boy's dream to play soccer at Wembley for England. You don't know what they'd give to be standing where you are now." To honor the many beautiful and impressive English churches and cathedrals, here's Marching Mizzou's tribute to the magnificent Winchester Cathedral. The last practice was outside the Rugby Football Union Stadium at Twickenham. Sadly enough, the trip was almost over. As we watch the scenes of the last rehearsal before the performance at Twickenham, let's look back on the trip as articles in several Missouri newspapers reported it. Some students at the University of Missouri-Columbia came back from spring break this week with Florida suntans. But for the many of the 300 members of Marching Mizzou, the band's reward was a severe, bad cold. The sniffles, however, had been picked up in grand style as the marching band performed in driving British rain before soccer crowds in Chelsea and Wembley stadiums and at the rugby audience in Twickenham. Even though it rained for 10 days straight, I could have handled another week over there, said Gail Fithrow, freshman percussionist from Wellsville, Missouri. When they weren't practicing for performance, band members toured London and other parts of Britain. They returned to St. Louis by bus late Sunday from their London to Chicago flight and headed back to Columbia. It was really easy getting around London, and the people were friendly to us, Guy Schreck, a graduate student symbolist from Warrenton, said. According to Tim Lotzenheiser, the huge crowds were easy to adjust to, and were so enormous and rowdy that they made our football games in America seem like a prayer meeting. The scene was London Heathrow Airport, March 6th, as Marching Mizzou's 300 members swarmed through the customs inspections. One customs official looked quizzically at the band member's name tag and asked, "Just what is Mizzou, love?" From that moment on, we knew it was true. Student marching bands are non-existent in England, but thanks to Marching Mizzou, it can never again be said that they are unknown. The British were slightly amused by the flashy gold and black band uniforms. "Liberace lives," one English gentleman laughed as the band filed out of the stadium. "We liked your show," called out another. "It was quite a giggle." The crowds at the rugby games were overwhelmingly male and became quite boisterous and vocal in their cheering after drinking in the stands. Their exuberance reached its greatest heights when they unceremoniously carried a terrified Mizzou flag girl off the field during the band performance in Twickenham Stadium. The female band members enjoyed the quaint English custom of calling women love. Girls were melting right and left whenever an Englishman would utter that endearment. Band member Holly Hufford remarked, "By the end of the trip, we would have given anything for a Big Mac." Rosemary Stibe, a clarinet player, talked to an official at Wembley who had been working at the stadium for 13 years. He told her Wembley fans had seen a lot of guest bands in that time, but never a college marching band. He told me he saw the Air Force Academy Band and thought they were fantastic until he saw us. He said, we far surpassed any group that had ever performed there before. In Dr. Pickard's mind, the trip was a total success. Saturday night, after the Twickenham game, he attended an exclusive dinner for rugby officials. The band was referred to with great applause from the audience, he said. It was a very sober type of thing. They raised a toast to the Queen, to both teams, and then to some of the guests. Few were introduced as I was. They were very, very sold on the band. Our performance is, of course, very important, but how we act is even more important, he said. I think we gave a good impression of America to the people in England. Missourians would have been proud of us. Asked if he would ever take 300 college band members across the ocean again for 10 days, Dr. Pickard quickly replied, at the drop of a hat. Twickenham, March 15th, Scotland versus England for the Calcutta Cup. The British television had its own caravan of trucks and was all set up for this important match. As the band prepared to take the field for the final performance in England, the Scottish were becoming loud and boisterous, anticipating the excitement of the rugby match. Just before the band took the field, they were greeted by a 100% full-blooded Englishman. devastating loss. Perhaps some of you can remember this golden oath. If you know the rest, please sing along. That we should begin our celebration of the United When we look back to the American Revolution, we remember the Boston Tea Party, when the American patriots voted fellowship and subsequently they were seen with the law. And that's when you have a little Tea Party Probably America's greatest writer of patriotic song was George M. Cohan, who expressed his feelings for the USA's present fight in one line, your land, old land.
official time, as it has provided a strong foundation for our government. Probably the greatest religious work ever proposed was the England's own George Frederick Handel. As we visit the Hallelujah Chorus. We like to thank everyone who's got more than giving us